This meeting is being recorded.
All right, Gloria, Toby, Paul, it's wonderful to see you guys. And we find ourselves on Mem Amid Bays on 40b. And we are continuing our discussion about the halachos of Shavias, talking about the sanctity of fruit that, well, I was about to say grows during the seventh year, but if you recall from last week's discussion, it may depend on whether it's a fruit or a vegetable, about whether we go basar chanata or basar lakita. Do we go based on when it reaches a certain threshold in its growth, or do we go based on when it's picked out of the ground? So that's what we discussed last time. And we now find ourselves, for those joining us, at Mem Amid Bays on 40b. And also what we discussed last time was we talked about what kind of things are subject to shvius. We talked about why a lulav would be subject to shvius, whereas usual other kinds of things that grow, like the other kinds of branches that grow from the ground, would not necessarily be subject to kedusha shvius. Now that that is all said and done, our adventure continues about 6 lines from the top of Mem Bays. And the question we're going to be dealing with this evening is, how does the sanctity of Shavias transfer? Now, there's going to be certain parallels, but also distinctions to other areas of halacha, such as Meiser Sheni. When you have Meiser Sheni and you want to bring it to Yerushalayim, so you can be podeh, you can redeem its sanctity and transfer it onto money. You bring the money to Yerushalayim, you buy food in Yerushalayim, and you eat that food there. So the Kedusha travels. We're going to see that for Shavias, it's actually not so straightforward. And the question also is, what's the method for transferring sanctity of Shvias? And I use the word transfer, but it's not entirely accurate, as we'll see, because I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler. What's going to happen is that when you exchange Shvias fruits, Shemitah fruit, for something else, that first item becomes sanctified, and the original Shvias fruit still retain their Kedusha Shvias. But then it's like, basically, if you're playing a game of tag, imagine the person who's originally it is always it. But then he tags someone else. Now that person, whoever he tags next, becomes it as well, but he's no longer. So the transference only begins once you are 1 degree removed. The Gemara will discuss this. I'm just giving you a heads up on that, just so we don't get thrown off. Now the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ein Shvius Mischaleles El Derech Mekach. The way that the kedusha of Shvius transfers is only through a mekach, through a sale. We'll talk about at the end. I was learning a piece in the Birchas Avram. I think Rav Arlinger is how you pronounce the name. It's a really, recently, they call like the Disney classic movies, the movies that were made in the 90s. So, it's a classic, even though it's relatively recent. It's very good lumdus on the daf. So the idea is that maybe it needs to transfer through an exchange. I give you money, you give me the Shemitah fruit, and then there's like a transference of essence, or not transference, but the money then that's used in exchange for the Shvias also becomes sanctified. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Bein b'derech mekach, bein b'derech chilo. There's two ways you could do it. You could do it by sale, or by doing it like we described with Meiser Sheni, by declaring that I am now transferring and taking Kedusha Shvias and putting it onto these coins. So that's their debate. Everyone agrees that through a sale it works. The question is whether you could do it through chilul without necessarily a business transaction. So we're going to now ask the following question, which is, well, great. Anyone can have an opinion, but what's the substance backing up their opinion, right? So this is why I always like when I listen to my political podcasts. Yeah, I know, Paul, you're about to warm me over here. So I like listening to 538. because they do the polls and statistics. So rather than listening to just a stam pundit make up whatever they want, like at least it's like rooted in data analysis. So there's like a little bit more substance. So anyone can have an opinion, but like what's the data supporting your opinion? So here we go. My time it's Rabbi Elazar. It says in the pasuk, Bishnas Hayovel Hazos. Okay, great. It talks about the Jubilee year. That's Shemitah related. Usamichle, and then it's juxtaposed to the following pasuk, V'chi simkru memkar derech mekach below derech hilo. So the next pasuk talks about business transactions. And this is just, Talmud 101. When you have two psukim that seemingly have nothing to do with each other right next to each other, it could very well be it's supposed to teach us that there is some kind of united theme between the two things. It's like that's the question, Ma'in Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. So that's what we always ask. So maybe it's to teach me that the only way that Shemitah's sanctity can get transferred is by doing it via business transaction through a sale. The Rabbi Yochanan, my taima, what's Rabbi Yochanan's basis to say that regular chilo works as well? Dechsiv ki yovel hi kodesh. So notice he used the word kodesh. Kodesh like hektish, like consecration. Ma kodesh bein b'derech mekach bein b'derech chilo. Just as with hektish, you're able to transfer the kedusha whether through chilo or business transaction. Av shvius bein derech mekach bein derech chilo. Likewise, for shvius, both options remain on the table. They are analogous in that respect. But wait, Rabbi Yochanan, Haiki Simkru Memkar, my Avidale. But wait a minute. Didn't Rabbi Elazar point out to us that there's a juxtaposition of a sale to the theme of Shemitah? So what does he do with this Smichas Psukim? What does he do with this juxtaposition? Mivoile Rabbi Yossi. He needs it for a separate teaching. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, the Tanya, for the following brisa. Am Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Bo re'ei kama kasha avaka shel shvius. Come and see how debilitating even avaka shel shvius. So Rashi points out in halacha we have something called avak ribis, and avak lashon hara. Avak is like the dust. So meaning certain things might not be lashon hara gamor. It might not be bona fide lashon hara, but it's the dust of lashon hara. It has elements of lashon hara. It skates too close to it. And likewise for ribis as well. Avak ribis is something that maybe doesn't cleanly qualify for ribis, but it's still enough within the ballpark, and that we call avak ribis. So similarly over here, avaka shel shvius. Now, what's avaka shel shvius? So actually, Tosas helps us out a little bit over here. Tosas explains that there's a mitzvah losase. There's a transgression of the Torah to work your field during Shemitah. But Tosas add, avol masa umatan, but doing mass business transactions. We don't just mean like, oh, I have an extra fruit over here I picked, but okay, I have an extra apple, I'll sell it to you. We mean like people doing like real bona fide business with their fields during Shemitah without working it though. So since they didn't actually work the field, they're not in violation of the negative commandment against working the field, but they are in violation of the positive commandment that it tells us that the mitzvah is la'achla, to eat the fruit of Shemitah, and Chazal understand it means la'achla v'lo lischora. It's for consumption, not for doing business with it. Okay? So anyway, that's called avaka shel shvius, right? So it's still a violation of the Torah, but it's not a violation of the negative commandment. It's just a violation of the positive commandment, which is still pretty bad. So adam nosim v'nosim parish shvius, someone who does business with shvius, l'sof mocheres metaltla veskelav. In the end of the day, he's going to have to sell his chattel, meaning like his moving his property, and his utensils. Shnemar. B'shnas hayova hazos teshuva ish al chuzaso. Again, our verse talking about the year of Yovel, usamech le, and it's juxtaposed with the following verse, v'chi simkru mem karla misecha. So what that means basically is that Rav Yochanan doesn't understand the juxtaposition to a sale, telling us the only way that Kedusha Shvius gets transferred is through the method of a sale, but it's just telling us a separate idea that's in this brisa that it's warning us that if you do business with Shvius, eventually it's not going to pay off. You're going to lose your possessions over it. So it's more of a hashkafic teaching than a halachic teaching we're supposed to get from that. Okay, very good. We understand what Rabbi Yochanan does with Rabbi Elazar's proof text. But what is Rabbi Elazar? Rabbi Elazar, hi, Rabbi Yochanan. What does he do with Rabbi Yochanan's proof? If we recall, Rabbi Yochanan's proof was it said the word Kodesh. So we thought to make a parallel between Hekdesh and Shemitah. So what does he do with the extra word Kodesh? Mivaya lelich Tanya, he requires it for the following brisa. Ki yovel hi Kodesh, that Yovel will be sanctified. What does that teach us? Ma Kodesh tofes es damav, av shvius tofeses es dameha. So just as the Kodesh is able to render the thing being exchanged, the money for it sanctified, so too Shvius is able to render it sanctified as well. That's what he learns from there. Okay? But the point being from all this is that we have a debate about whether we only have one modality of transferring Kedusha Shvius, meaning through a sale, or do we have also the standard form of Chilul as well, which I don't think we looked at Rashi originally. What did Rashi say on there? Was there Rashi? Okay, never mind. All right. Now we're going to bring in the two brisas. One brisa which seemingly supports Rabbi Elazar's position, and then we'll conclude with a second brisa which will support Rabbi Yochanan's position. Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Elazar. Now this is going to be a little bit of a long-winded proof, but it's rather straightforward once we get to the end. You're just going to hang on tight. Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Elazar. This following brisa, so basically we're going to read through a lot of the brisa right now, only to make our point at the end. So Shvius tofeses es dameha. So Shvius causes the money being exchanged with it to have Kedusha Shvius. Shenemar, ki yovel hi kodesh tialechem, ma kodesh tofeses damav, va'asar, av Shvius tofeses dameva asura. As we learned earlier, the same way Kodesh can render the money sanctified, so too Shemitah, the Shvius as well. Ima Kodesh tofes dama v'yotzi l'chulin. Shvius tofes dama v'yotzi l'chulin. But wait a minute, shouldn't it work the same way that when you redeem something that has a Kodesh status to it, usually the way it works is that you are actually transferring the Kedusha, right? Remember we talked about Meiser Sheni, or maybe you're redeeming something that was consecrated to the temple. So you are now taking the Kedusha off of that food or off that object, and you're transferring it onto the coins. But Shemitah doesn't operate that way. Shemitah, both the original fruit and the money that's being exchanged for, both of them are now kadosh. Why would I think that? Tamalomar tihiyet. It says the word tihiyet in the pasuk, which implies bahaviyasa tehe. It should remain as such, meaning the original Shemitah fruit retains its kedusha shvius, but what it does is that it does a favor for the money being exchanged. It says, you know what? You get to be holy as well. Kind of like the flame lighting the other candle. It doesn't lose its flame. It just lights another candle. But the funny thing is, once you start moving a third degree, a fourth degree, a fifth degree, then they just pass it along. So the Gemara explains, Haketzad, lokach per shvius basar. Let's say you bought Peiros Shvius by exchanging meat for it. So Elu ve'elu misparim b'shvius. Both of them have now the Kedusha Shemitah, meaning both of them will have to be destroyed. Remember we talked about Biur Shvius, that you have to destroy once it's no longer in the field. But then, let's say you took that meat that was exchanged for Shemitah fruit, lokach b'basar dagim, and then the meat gets exchanged for fish. Yatsa basar v'nichnasu dagim. So the basar is no longer kadosh. Now the dagim are. Now the fish are. Okay, let's go another degree. Lagach b'dagim yayin. Yatsu dagim v'nechnas yayin. Let's say now you take those dagim, which have kedusha shmita and kedusha shvius, and then you go buy wine with it. Great. So now the fish are no longer sanctified. Now it's the wine. And then let's do it again. Lakach v'yayin shemen. Yatsu yayin v'nechnas shemen. And so you see how it's just like it's a game of tag. Tag your it at that point. And they keep passing it along to the next guy. But what's interesting is, Haketzad, Achron Nichnas B'Shvius, whoever is the last guy to get tagged has Kedushas Shvius, and also Upri Atzmo Aser. And the original fruit still retains its Kedushas Shvius as well, unlike when you are redeeming something from Hektish. Now, why do we bring this all up? All of this in the Brisa was brought up to make the following point. Notice the language in the Brisa. Midiktani lokach lokach. Notice how every single exchange was a transaction. Alma derech mekach in derech hillo. The implication here is the only way Kedusha Shvius gets transferred is through a transaction, not just through a simple declaration of transference on one party's end. So that's a proof to Rabbi Elazar that you could only transfer Kedusha Shvius through Mekach Umemkar, through a business transaction. However, Tanya Kavais Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan has a, what do you know? He has a brisa that supports him. Echad Shvius v'echad Meiser Sheni. Both Shvius and Meiser Sheni share the same rules. Mischalin al behema chaya v'of, bein chaya bein shchutin. You can transfer the Kedusha onto animals, domesticated and undomesticated birds, whether they be alive or whether they were already slaughtered. Divri Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say, Al shchutin mischalin, al chayin ein mischalin. If it's already slaughtered, you may transfer Kedusha onto it. But if it's still alive, you're not allowed to. Why? What's going to happen is that you're going to have Bessie the cow with Kedusha Shvius. She's going to have a Gantz Mishpacha, and then you're going to have all these flocks full of cows with Kedusha Shvius, and then you're going to sell it to someone else, and then it's going to make things terrible. People are not really going to know what to do with these cows. Amar Rava, Machlokis Bischarim. This whole Machlokis only applies to the male animals. Avol benekevos, but when it comes to the female animals, Divrei Hakol al shchutim mischalin al chayin a mischalin. Everyone agrees that if they are alive, you cannot be mechal kedushas shvius onto them. Gezerah shemi galben adarm, because again the concern is they're going to have a big bias now in Yisrael, and then there's going to be a lot of kedusha shvius that we have to account for. So okay, that's the end of the Gemara for tonight. What I wanted to dig into a little bit, and this is where I decided it's been a while since I took this one off my shelf, the Birchas Avraham, sort of Arlinger. He has a piece where he tries to kind of dig in a little bit deeper into these two methods. So our entire discussion in the Gemara is about how to transfer Kedusha Shvius. Is it only through business transaction, or can you make a declaration of it? Now, here's the thing. Isn't a business transaction just an other way of chilul? Basically the assumption, and I think it's somewhere in Rashi he says it, but I'm not seeing where it was. But I believe Rashi says it somewhere, that what's basically happening is that Mekach Umemkar is just chilul, but without having to make an explicit declaration. Because if you own the Kedusha Shvius fruit, you just want to transfer Kedusha on your end, you can attempt to do that, but a business transaction, you don't even need to stipulate it. Automatically, by virtue of exchanging the two things, the Kedusha Shvius tags on to the money. So that's one way of understanding it. But the other way of understanding it, he bases this on Reb Chaim, is that when it comes to Mekach Umemkar, it's its own unique method. It's its own unique modality. He says, "V'af below ma'aseh chilul." It doesn't operate through the method of chilul. It's not just like an implicit chilul, it's its own separate way. And this is important because we didn't see this yet tonight, but he points out, he says, Ubezem mevuar ma de b'maskana de sugyan amar Rav Ashi de machlokis bepri sheni. Rav Ashi says the whole machlokis is really just about the second fruit, ava bepri rishon, but the initial shvius fruit, l'kuli alma derech mekach in derech hilolo. Everyone agrees that for the initial fruit that retains its kedusha, the only way it transfers is through mekach umemkar, through a sale, and not through chilul. Why? Behind the chilul who in havar's kedusha mizelzek chilul is an act of transferring, taking kedusha away from one thing and transferring it onto another. But with the first initial fruit we mentioned, it retains its kedusha. So chilul doesn't even make any sense because you're not actually taking the kedusha off the initial fruit. It's retaining it. It's just tagging someone else, like the candle lighting another wick. It just lights another flame. Masha ain't kain mekach, but when it comes to a business transaction, dahava geder shel nitfasin tachtav. What's happening is that both then become kadosh. That's why we'll see next week that the conclusion is that for the first fruit, everyone agrees only through mekachu memkar, and then resultant fruits, it could be through chilul, because then you're actually transferring kedusha as opposed to copying and pasting the kedusha, right? It's Control C, not a Control X. Ah, there. Okay, that made sense. So that's the point he makes. Is he has a little bit more of an arichas, but that's the gist of it. All right, but we will get to that Gemara, God willing, next week. All right. Everyone should have a wonderful Shabbos. I think I'm on for a 10:30 shir, actually. I think I am. So we're gonna do mikvah, money, and mysticism. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I got a good alliteration, and I'll share a snippet of it at Shalosh Shudas, but every week I get less and less time at Shalosh Shudas. So I'm like, depends how many nine and nines I like to do at Yedid Nefesh. So I only get 3 minutes. I only get to give a snippet, but I get to give the longer version at 10:30. All right. Have a good night, everyone. A good Shabbos to all.
Good shot.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
You.